Dillian Whyte and Moses Itauma. So, we've had the weigh-in, and there's been some interesting things that have been transpiring through the weigh-in. So, and I actually wrote it down. Dillian Whyte came in at 244 pounds. So Dillian Whyte came in at 244 pounds. So what does this mean? This means he came in a stone lighter than his last fight. And I believe that was against Tete. Apologies with the pronunciation on the name. So he came in a stone lighter. But what's more interesting is that this is allegedly the lightest he's been for 10 years. So what does this mean? There's been a rumour that's been circulating the last 2 weeks that Dillian Whyte is in great shape. And it would appear that at the weigh-in, this would confirm that he's in great shape. Now, as I've stated in other videos, and I've spoken about this, there's a difference between being in fighting shape and being in shape, or being visually aesthetic. So you could look better but not be in fighting shape. And an example that I've given before is Riddick Bowe versus Andrew Golotto. The rematch, Riddick Bowe looked in better shape, but he wasn't in fighting shape, and that was reflected in the fight. You look at David Haye. David Haye's typically a body beautiful, but in the Tony Bellew fights, he was in shape in a sense, visually looking very aesthetic, very fit, but not necessarily in fighting shape, able to take the necessary punches and take the punishment that's a product of being a boxer. So that we know he's in shape. Is he in boxing shape? Well, we will find out, but the implications are good. I actually think he may have been lighter than the Anthony Joshua fight. And if you know, I've been stating that I really liked Dillian Whyte's performance. I really liked Dillian Whyte's performance in the Anthony Joshua fight. So that to me indicates that he's been training hard. It may indicate a combination of things. Number one, he's been training hard, but number two, maybe there's been a bit of an emphasis on fixing up his nutrition, which would be great. Psychologically, this is very good for Dillian Whyte, and I guess Moses Itauma knows that Dillian Whyte is taking this extremely seriously. How that will affect him, that probably depends on his own psychology. If they were expecting a Dillian Whyte who's just come for the money, then this would be definitely a deterrent. But I don't know why they would expect that, because I don't think there's anything in Dillian Whyte's past that would indicate that he doesn't take fighting seriously and that he would just lay down. But if they had any assumptions that he wasn't taking this seriously, then this could affect his mental state. But it definitely shows that Dillian Whyte has meant business and has engaged in a positive camp. The outcome of that camp, we don't know what's happened in sparring, but we know that the outcome of that camp is that Dillian Whyte has come in the lightest he's ever been. It's a good positive indication. Would this affect his punch resistance? We don't know. So let's look at Moses Itauma, and I've wrote down that he weighed 235 pounds. Now, this is in line with his last fight, but allegedly, in his fight against McLean, and McLean, if you remember, fought Filip Hrgović. Against McLean, allegedly, he was 254 pounds, but then in his last fight, he was 234 pounds, and now he's 235 pounds. So what we've got here is we've got the McLean fight where he's like weighed here, then the next fight he's come here, and then he's kind of on the cusp of the same shape. Now, you would expect him to be in great shape, and he might be trying to find what weight is he good at. Is he good being lighter, or is he good being heavier? He actually had a sensational performance against McLean, ironically, but maybe he feels more comfortable coming in at a lighter weight. Now, with regards to the stare down, with regards to the stare down, as you expect, Dillian Whyte looked very fierce. He looked very serious. And yeah, he wasn't looking passive. He was looking in the moment. He was looking at his opponent, no fear. Itauma doesn't look like he really tries to intimidate his opponents. So it's like he doesn't try to intimidate opponents, but at the same time he's showing you that he's not afraid. So he was there, he was standing his ground, but like I said, it's not part of his psychology to try and intimidate opponents. That's just not what he does. So what can we take from this? Again, the main thing to take is that Dillian Whyte is lighter, and there's implications that he's in great shape. Now, there's another rumour that's been circulating. There's another rumour that has been circulating, and that's the rumour of the knockdown. And apparently this was circulated by Shannon Briggs. Remember him? Let's Go Champ. Shannon Briggs, who fought George Foreman. He also is a former world champion. He fought Lennox Lewis. That was a 5-round war. I believe he hurt Lennox Lewis in the first round of their fight. I believe he surprised Lennox Lewis in that fight. Shannon Briggs brought a lot to that fight. But Shannon Briggs has circulated this fight. I believe the nucleus of the rumor was circulated by Shannon Briggs. Interestingly, when they interviewed Derek Chisora about the rumor, and he actually said that it might be a good thing, and that because that means he's learning. And I can actually see that perspective, because in a sense, if you're not making mistakes in sparring, and if you're not, if you don't want to get hurt in sparring, but you want the sparring to be competitive, because if it's not competitive and then you have a fight that's competitive, then you might be shocked. So being knocked down ultimately is not a good thing, but it can be a good thing in the sense that it means that you're getting competitive sparring. People are coming in to win, and that's what you want. You want to be able to do that. And more importantly, if he did get knocked down in sparring, the most important thing would be, how did he react? So imagine I go into sparring and then sparring partner B knocks me down. If I then cancel the sparring and then say that I don't want to spar that person anymore, that's problematic. But if I come back the next day and then beat him up on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, then there can be something positive to take from that. Yes, I got knocked down, but I came back and I figured out the puzzle, and then I started dominating that particular sparring partner. So his reaction to that could actually build some resolve, and it could actually answer some questions that he himself may have not have had the answer to. So, for example, if he'd never been knocked down before, and he gets up and he dictates his opponent, then he knows that's in him. And if he hadn't been knocked down before, then he wouldn't know the answer to that question. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. And obviously, if it was a devastating knockdown, because there's different types of knockdowns, there's different levels of knockdowns, then that can be concerning, because that could definitely impact his confidence. So if you've been knocked down, that can certainly impact your confidence. And if he comes in with his confidence impacted, that means we're not going to get the same at Moses Itauma. And there's a few important elements here. There's the atmosphere, which will be new for him because there's more attention, and then he's coming into the fight suffering a knockdown in sparring. That could be an interesting variable. And then you got Dillian Whyte in tremendous shape, allegedly. So this is getting so interesting. It really is. Is this rumor true? We don't know if it's true. Does Briggs have any affiliation with either team? I don't know. I don't think he does. So has he got a reason to lie? Even if he's telling the truth, the person who could have given him that information could have, could not be telling the truth. So Shannon Briggs may be telling his truth, even though it might not be the truth. So if I told Shannon Briggs that he got knocked down and it was a lie, Shannon Briggs saying he got knocked down isn't a lie from his perspective, because he's believing the information that I'm feeding him, just giving a hypothetical there. So Shannon Briggs may not be lying, but it may not be the truth. Or alternatively, the person who told him that information could be telling the truth, and therefore Shannon Briggs is telling the truth, and it is the objective truth that he got knocked down. Who knows? We probably will not know for the foreseeable future. Typically, camps will withhold that type of information, and for good reason, because that can impact the psychology of the individual, of the fighter, and it can affect the dynamics of the team, and it can obviously affect the confidence even further. So another thing is that we had the media workout, and you know what? There wasn't much to get from that. Kind of frustrated with media workouts. Let's talk about that. I remember the days when you had Floyd Mayweather, Canelo, and Triple G. I believe they did like media workouts. They worked out for like half an hour, 45 minutes. They did full comprehensive workouts. And I think there's a question to be asked. And the question is a workout for the public the same as a workout behind closed doors? The answer would probably depend on the trainer and the outfit. Typically, I would think that the workout you do for the public will be slightly different to the workout you do indoors. So clearly you're going to be hitting the mitts when you're training away from the public eye, but in the public you'll be doing different punch combinations because you don't want to give that secret information to your opponent. So if you're working on a specific punching drill, you wouldn't necessarily do that punching drill in public unless you're trying to, create some serious mind games, because the opponent will be like, oh, he's not going to do that because he's shown us that. So I understand why people are not doing media workouts, but I think for the boxing public and for the general public, I actually think the media workout is really quite important. I think it's an important marketing tool, and it just gives an indication as well of someone's fitness level and just where they are psychologically. And like I said, I remember when it used to be commonplace for or certain fighters, particularly Gennady Golovkin. I remember he did extensive media workouts. I think Andre Ward, the great Andre Ward, right? The great Andre Ward, I believe it was the rematch against Sergey Kovalev. And I believe he did like an extensive media workout. And it was interesting as well. It was, it was different type of exercises, and, it's all motivation, it's all marketing, and it builds the event. It's a shame that, yes, there are media workouts, but they're not as intense. Nowadays you just got someone coming out and they'll just do a little bit of shadow boxing, and then that's it, and then they'll do a bit of talking, and then they go home. It's a shame that there's not more of an intense media workout. So let's move on from that. So the other thing is that, again, I was watching TalkSport, Boxing TalkSport, and it's Duke McKenzie. Put some respect on his name, former two-time champion, world champion. He introduced an interesting idea with regards to this matchup. He introduced a really interesting idea with regards to this matchup. Now, Dillian Whyte he's been like saying certain things, like he's been undermining his own credibility. And many people would say that this is playing mind games. This is psychological warfare, as you put it, And he was saying that actually what Dillian Whyte is saying with regards to being tired and, minimizing himself might be a reflection of how he's actually feeling with regards that he's tired of boxing. Now, when we say tired of boxing, what does that mean? I don't think it means he's tired of fighting, but he might be tired of the politics of boxing. He might be tired. And remember, Dillian Whyte was a number one contender for a long time, and for a long time he maintained that position, and it took him forever to get the title shot. So he was suggesting that, and again, there's the politics of boxing, but then there's the whole thing of going through boxing for a long time. I've gone through training camp after training camp, war after war, engaging with the media, etc., etc. I guess it can wear you down. So he was suggesting that when Dillian Whyte is verbalizing these things, he's honestly telling you that he's tired of boxing, and it's not purely a psychological ploy. So I guess there are two things at play here. And I put it in the perspective 1 and the perspective 2. Perspective 1, Dillian Whyte is playing mind games. Think of it, when David Haye fought Valuev, he said, I'm going to blow him out in 2 rounds, I'm going to knock him out. And then he came out and he danced, and he used loads of lateral movement. So he played the mind game of saying, I'm going to knock him out, and convince the public, and maybe convince Valuev that he was going to go for a knockout, and then he did completely the opposite. So in this sense, when Dillian Whyte is saying he's worn out and he's old and he hasn't got anything left, that's the opposite of the reality that he's raring to go, he's in the greatest shape of his life. That's perspective 1. Perspective 2 is that just Dillian Whyte is just tired of boxing. He's tired of it. And he's just introducing an element of honesty. And I just thought that was a fascinating perspective by Duke McKenzie, because when he was relaying this perspective, he was actually imparting his personal boxing experience. And again, put some respect on his name. I believe it's a 2-time world champion, so he definitely knows what he's talking about. And I don't think that should be discredited. Obviously, each boxer's individual psychology is different. You know, every human being is different. But when it comes to boxing, every boxer's psychology is different. So just because that happened to Duke McKenzie doesn't necessarily mean that's happening to Dillian Whyte. But at the same time, it's an interesting take on the fight. So this is all interesting stuff. And then you got the face-off. And in the face-off, again, Dillian Whyte in the past has been a very intimidating figure. He can be confrontational. And we have a reference point, Anthony Joshua. If you look at the Anthony Joshua situation, or if in the Anthony Joshua fight, there was various confrontations. He can be confrontational. But in this face-off, Dillian Whyte was being hyperbolic. Yes, Dillian Whyte was being hyperbolic on how old he was and how he would need help to be carried to the end of the road. I would say clearly playing mind games, but as we've looked at, there's a different perspective that perhaps Dillian Whyte is just sick and tired of maybe not boxing, but the boxing politics. So to me, in the face-off, neither camp, neither Dillian Whyte and neither Moses Itauma were trying to intimidate one another. They were not trying to intimidate one another. Dillian Whyte was very composed, very calm, and this is different to his personality, his normal personality. Moses Itauma did state that, and he did state this, he said that if he follows the game plan, right? If he follows the game plan, it's going to be a knockout. So what does that mean? Again, it feels like there's some mind games going on there. If he follows the game plan, there is going to be a knockout. And, again, Dillian Whyte was, if I was to summarize Dillian Whyte's performance, it was being hyperbolic about his age, presenting himself as he's no threat at all, and just being not passive. He was definitely in the moment. You could feel the energy, but I guess there was a difference between his words and his stature, because his body language was very engaged in terms of his posture, but his words were, like I said, they were hyperbolic about him being old and him being discredited. And what was interesting though was Moses at one point said that all the pressure is on him. And his reasoning for that was that he's expected to knock out Dillian Whyte. This is an expectation of the public, whether this be the general public and I guess it's the general public and the boxing public. So because of this expectation to knock Dillian Whyte out, he's carrying that pressure. For him to be saying that in a face-off would indicate to me that he is actually physiologically carrying that pressure. He's feeling that pressure. He's actually feeling the pressure that not only does he need to win, he needs to have a significant performance. I actually think that gives a bit of an edge to Dillian Whyte, and I don't know why Moses Itauma would verbalize that. It doesn't seem to be an effective mind game, and I think that was just something that he said that was just genuine. He genuinely feels that the pressure is on him. Here's an important question. How does Moses Itauma react to pressure? I don't know the answer to that question. But assuming that he reacts amazingly well to pressure, then maybe him stacking that pressure on his shoulders makes him punch harder, makes him fight harder, or makes him a more formidable opponent. In that case, carry the pressure. However, if he is someone who feels pressure, and if he is someone who responds negatively to pressure, to additionally put some more pressure on him, when I don't think like the interviewer said that there was more pressure on you, he voluntarily said that there was more pressure on him. I think that gives Dillian Whyte something to that can give some encouragement for Dillian Whyte. And remember, Dillian Whyte is the one who's bringing the experience. He's bringing the experience to the table. So when you look at the table, Moses Itauma is bringing youth, speed, power. He brings a lot. But Dillian Whyte brings the experience, the knowledge, the boxing intelligence, and of course, that phenomenal left hook. So let's talk about the final press conference. And just case in point, I feel like there hasn't been any press conferences for this fight apart from this one. And this is not typical of a boxing event. Matter of fact, if you look at the Chris Eubank Conor Benn fight, there was multiple press conferences. Matter of fact, it felt like there was press conferences every week. Now, clearly I'm being hyperbolic, but there was many press conferences and they clearly marketed the fight. The infamous X-Lap really elevated the marketability of the fight and really elevated the magnitude of the event with regards to how many people wanted to see the fight. And you would be surprised, you would think that considering that fighters get pay-per-view bonuses, especially main events, you would think that the fighters would want a press conference, A, for the marketability, but B, for the opportunity to generate interest and to generate awareness, because typically in a press conference it lets people know that there is a fight, and if there's some back and forth that stimulates the public, then the public interest would likely mean more eyeballs. That means more pay-per-view buys, more tickets, etc. But for this fight, for some reason, that hasn't happened, which seems quite weird to me. Anyway, in the final press conference, there was an interesting part of the final press conference, and Moses Itauma was asked a question. I can't remember specifically what that question was. But it was something to do around, do you think Dillian Whyte is playing mind games? And what surprised me with Moses Itauma's response, and I'll explain why. So in his response, and again, I'm paraphrasing, this is not a direct quote, Moses Itauma stated that he felt that Dillian Whyte was using the 48 laws of power. he was trying to come across as a sheep when he's really a wolf. Powerful stuff. Now, what does this mean? Number one, it means that Moses Itauma is familiar with the 48 laws of power. Number two, it also means that he believes that not only is Dillian Whyte implementing the 48 laws of power, he can give a reference point as to how he's implementing the 48 laws of power. And number three, this would probably mean that if he's aware of the 48 laws of power, then he's probably trying to utilize either the 48 laws of power or some other strategic initiative to gain an advantage. Because I think that comment gave an insight into Moses Itauma. So clearly he's aware of the potential psychological game that Dillian Whyte is playing. And as we stated, there's a perspective 1 and a perspective 2. The perspective 1 is that manipulation. Remember the David Hay reference. Tricking Valuev, I'm going to come for the knockout. And then he does the constant movement and fights an entirely different fight. And there's obviously many other references in boxing where boxers have done this. They say one thing and then they do entirely the opposite. And you could also argue it's mind games if you say one thing and you actually do it. I'll give a reference to that. Tyson Fury, Deontay Wilder, the rematch, the second fight. In that fight, Tyson Fury said he's going to go in the center of the ring and just knock Deontay Wilder out. No one believed him, or I don't believe anyone believed him. The general public and the boxing view was that Tyson Fury, to maximize his chances of victory, would need to use the ring and would need to box. So typically you would have thought that Deontay Wilder would have trained for a Tyson Fury that would have been mobile like he was in the first fight. However, he came into the second fight and he did take the center of the ring and he did knock Deontay Wilder out. I believe the fight was stopped. That was a reverse psychology. So I think this gives an insight into Moses Itauma with regards to his own psychology. And maybe we need to look at his comments and understand that his comments may be more intentional. In other words, that when he's saying something, there's some intention behind it or there's some strategy behind it. Also, I believe that Ben Davidson is a strategical person. So it wouldn't be out of the ordinary to foresee that someone is being strategic in the sense of, okay, let's say this and blah, 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 and let's approach the press conference like this. I believe, again, David Hay would do this, and I believe that he would be in cahoots with Adam Booth with regards to implementing not just the boxing strategy, but the strategy for the press conferences. A great example of that would have been the Vladimir Klitschko fight, where I believe he clearly got under Vladimir Klitschko's skin in the press conferences and particularly in the face-off. So I think that was something that was it was an insight into his personality. It was an insight into Moses Itauma's psychology. And obviously we're going to see more of Moses Itauma, assuming that he wins. He's getting that public exposure because there seems to be this narrative bias that there's this projection that he may be the next big thing. And I think that there seems to be this projection that he could be the next guy or the next serious threat for Usyk. Also in the final press conference, there was some conflict with David Adelaide and Filip Hrgović. I felt like Filip Hrgović looked just so confident. He just looked ridiculously confident. Adelaide looked more reserved. He looked more just ready to fight. Like, Adelaide has marketed fights in the past. He did some effective marketing for the Fabio Wardley fight. So when a fight needs to be marketed, then he is willing to do some outlandish things, but clearly Adelaide didn't seem to have that intention. He was just there to, just going through the motions. But I did get a sense that Filip Hrgović was extremely confident. This is important because obviously he lost to Daniel Dubois. Yes, he came back with a victory over Joe Joyce, but he's no longer an undefeated fighter. So you would think, would this impact his confidence? But the way he was talking and his posture, it indicated, to be honest, it almost looked like it was bordering along arrogance. Has he taken David Adelaide lightly? You would think surely he hasn't taken him lightly, particularly after what happened against Daniel Dubois. You would think he wouldn't take anyone lightly. But is it overconfidence? Is it arrogance? Is it confidence? Clearly confidence is a good thing. Overconfidence and arrogance can be perceived as a bad thing. But I guess those elements, confidence, overconfidence, arrogance, they can impact your fighting style differently. So it'll be interesting to see exactly how Filip Hrgović approaches this fight, because if he is so overconfident that he starts laying on the ropes and he starts negating his jab, then there is a massive potential that he will be in serious trouble. And hopefully for him, he's not so overconfident to underestimate the danger of that left hook. He needs to have trained to nullify that left hook, because if he hasn't, he potentially is in massive trouble. So that there was some, it was quite interesting. And David Adelaide always looks in shape. Filip Hrgović looked in shape as well, which I think there was a lot of eyes on Filip Hrgović, because I think there's been times when people may have questioned if Filip Hrgović was in shape, particularly against McLean. And if he replicates the performance he did against McLean, then he will potentially get knocked out. Even though I think there may be a slight advantage for Filip Hrgović because of that jab and because of his experience, if he comes in with the performance against McLean, then he will be in serious trouble. So that's a very interesting fight. So anyway, the other thing I wanted to quickly talk about is I was looking into the the Dillian Whyte fight, and I've always got I always want to know the business element of things. So I was trying to find some information on the contracts of the fight. Now, going off face value, I totally assumed that Moses Itauma would be getting paid more for the fight. I thought he's the A side, Dillian Whyte's the B side, so I thought Dillian Whyte would be getting a good amount of money, but Moses Itauma would be getting paid more because he's the A side. Interestingly, when I looked into it, and I have the numbers here, Dillian Whyte is getting paid 2.5 million. That's a tremendous lot of that's a really nice paycheck. And Moses Itauma is guaranteed 1 million. So we've got a massive disparity. These figures may be wrong, but let's assume that they're correct. So Dillian Whyte is guaranteed 2.5 million. Moses Itauma is guaranteed 1 million. So that's like a disparity of 1.5 million. Interestingly, the pay-per-view, so depending on the sales of the pay-per-view, and I don't know how they work this out, but the potential that Dillian Whyte can make is 3.5 million. That's the potential of what he can make. Where with Moses Itauma, with the pay-per-view bonus, and again, I don't know how they worked that out, the potential is 1.5 million. So I'm assuming when they say the potential, it means that he's guaranteed 1 million, and then there's a 500,000 extra potential that he can get if the pay-per-view hits a certain threshold. And Dillian Whyte is guaranteed 2.5 million, and then if it hits a certain threshold, he'll get an extra 1.5 million. This is a huge disparity. What do I think about this? I think Dillian Whyte has an amazing manager. Whoever negotiated that contract needs to be saluted, because that's a very nice pay packet. Now, obviously, when you get massive sums of money like that, there'll be a massive tax. This is an assumption, but obviously you've got to pay your team, so you're a nutritionist, your trainer, your sparring partners, the camp, so the rent, the electricity. There's a whole load of money coming out of that, but still a nice chunk of money. But the good thing about that is that when you're paying a fighter that amount of money, it's very likely that he can reinvest some of it into having the best camp possible, and that seems to be what has happened here. So that's that's a good it's a good retirement package. But what's interesting about that is that you see those type of numbers and you think, okay, if Dillian Whyte loses and retires, he leaves with a good chunk of money. But like I said, he's come into the fight in great shape, and it looks like he's not looking at this as his last fight. He's looking at this as a gateway to get to get an even bigger fight. And if he wins this, there could be the trilogy with Derek Chisora. This could open up so many doors. This key of winning this fight opens up so many doors for him, with regards to mouth-watering fights and big paydays. With Moses Itauma, I would say that they're obviously really confident that they're going to be triumphant to negotiate that. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily be too happy if I was Moses Itauma with my management team negotiating that type of package. To be honest, I would be, I would want to be at least matching, or I feel like the disparity is very, very high. Obviously, typically in these situations, the boxers do the boxing, the trainers do the training, and the promoters and the managers, they're the ones that sit down at the negotiating table. So he may not have been aware of what Dillian Whyte is making, but Dillian Whyte he's making a considerable amount of money. So I think as this fight progresses, I think there's this so as this fight progresses, I think there's this prevailing notion that Dillian Whyte has got a chance. I was looking through some of the comments, and a lot of people are pulling for Dillian Whyte. It seems that, people really want him to win. People like Moses Itauma. It's like they like Moses Itauma, but they love Dillian Whyte. And when you look at the condition that he's coming in, and you look at how seriously it appears that he's taking this, then you look at the allegation of a knockdown rumor. If true, how does that impact Moses Itauma? How does Moses Itauma react to the enormity of the event? Because this will be the biggest event that he's been in. Dillian Whyte has been on big events. Moses Itauma hasn't yet. He's been on the big stage, but not as the headliner. So this is a new thing for Moses Itauma. And I feel that percentage-wise, I think this fight, a lot of people are looking at this as a closer fight. And I think if it ends early, I think you would probably favour Moses Itauma because of the youth, and because he's had he would have less ring rust because he's been fighting more regularly. So that would indicate to me that he's more likely to get the early knockout if there is an early knockout. But like I said, if the rounds progress, if Dillian Whyte is able to invest in the body, and if he gets that left hook, if he gets that left hook off early, it's lights out for Moses Itauma. If he gets that left hook off, if he's able to land it. But even if he's not able to land it, if he's able to get this into the middle rounds, if he's able to invest in the body, if he's able to set up the traps, and if Moses Itauma is not able to deal with that, if he's affected by the pressure of the environment, if he's affected by his confidence because of the alleged knockdown, and if he's just walking into the traps that Dillian Whyte's setting, I feel that if the fight starts to progress into the middle and late rounds, I don't know I don't know where it goes percentage-wise, but it's like a fight that goes 70-30, but then it can go 60-40, and then you can go 50-50, and then if it progresses and Dillian Whyte is getting some traction and is landing to the body and is starting to implement his experience and boxing intelligence, it's not out of the question that Dillian Whyte could win this fight. It really isn't. But as they say, a lot of people are saying that Moses Itauma is super, super special. A lot of people are saying that he is that guy. He is the next person for Usyk. So if that's the case, then this is the stage to show that. And another thing would be to say is that, considering they've negotiated a contract where effectively he gets 1 million less than his opponent, or 1.5 million less than his opponent, wherever the numbers are, it would indicate that his team are very confident of victory. So like I said, this has the potential to be a really great fight.